Reading from Srila Prabhupada's biography, abridged version. This is introduction. It was August 13th, just a few days before Janmashtami, the appearance day of, the appearance day anniversary of Lord Krishna. During these last years, he had been in Vrindavan for Janmashtami. Many Vrindavan residents would never live there. They were old and at peace in Vrindavan. Bhaktivedanta Swami was also concerned that he might die away from Vrindavan. That was why all the Vaishnava sadhus and widows had taken vows not to leave, even for Mathura, because to die in Vrindavan was the perfection of life. And the Hindu tradition was that a sannyasi should not cross the ocean and go to the land of the Mlechas. But beyond all that was the desire of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and his desire was non different from that of Lord Krishna. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had predicted that the chanting of Hare Krishna would be known in every town and village of the world. He took a taxi down to the Kolkata port, carrying with him his luggage, an umbrella, and a Bengali copy of Chaitanya Charitamrita, which he intended to read during the crossing. Somehow he would be able to cook on board, or if not, he would starve, whatever Krishna desired. He checked his essentials: passenger ticket, passport, visa, P form, sponsor's address. Finally, it was happening. As Prabhupada would often recall later, with great difficulty I got out of the country. Some way or other, by Krishna's grace, I got out so that I could spread the Krishna consciousness movement all over the world. Otherwise, to remain in India, it was not possible. I wanted to start a movement in India, but I was not at all encouraged. The black cargo ship, small and weathered, was moored at dockside, a gangway leading from the dock to the ship's deck. Indian merchant sailors curiously eyed the elderly saffron-dressed sadhu as he spoke last words to his companion in the taxi, then walked determinedly toward the boat. Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Actually, I missed. There is a little bit to read about this festival on the Vaishnav calendar. It's a festival of Jagannath Mishra. On this day, Jagannath Mishra, Lord Chaitanya's father, celebrated the birth of his son Nimai by giving varieties of charity to the brahmanas, professional singers, dancers, blessing givers, and the poor. Chandrasekharacharya and Shivas Thakur performed the ritualistic ceremonies prescribed at the time of birth according to religious principles. Shri Jagannath Mishra ki jai. So reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 1, text number 52. Dehi agyo jitashad vargo Dehyagyo jita shadvargo Dehyagyo jita shadvargo Nechan karmani karyate Nechan karmani karyate Nechan karmani karyate Koshakara ivatmanam Koshakara ivatmanam Karmana chadya muhyati. Karmana chadya muhyati. Karmana chadya muhyati. Dehyagyo shadvargo. Nichan karmani karyate. Koshakara ivatmanam. Karmana chadya muhyati. Dehyagyo shadvargo. Nichan karmani karyate. Koshakara ivatmanam. Karmana chadya muhyati. Dehyagyo shadvargo. Nichan karmani karyate. Koshakara ivatmanam. Karmana chadya muhyati. Dehyagyo shadvargo. Nichan karmani karyate. Koshakara ivatmanam. Karmana chadya muhyati. Deyagyojita shadvargo. Nicham karmani karyate. Koshakara ivatmanam. Karmana chadya muhyati. Vaishnavas. Deyagyojita shadvargo. Nichan karmani karyate. Koshakara ivatmanam. Karmana chadya muhyati. Dehyagyo shadvargo. Nichan karmani karyate. Koshakara ivatmanam. Karmana chadya muhyati. Dehi, the embodied soul. Agya, without perfect knowledge. Ajita Shad Varga, who has not controlled the senses of perception and the mind. Na ichan, without desiring. Karmani, activities for material benefit. Karyate, is caused to perform. Koshakara, the silkworm. Iva, like Atmanam, himself. Karmana, by fruitive activities. Achadya, covering. Muhyati, becomes bewildered. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. The foolish, embodied living entity, inept at controlling his senses and mind, is forced to act according to the influence of the modes of material nature, against his desires. He is like a silkworm that uses its own saliva to create a cocoon and then becomes trapped in it with no possibility of getting out. The living entity traps himself in a network of his own fruitive activities and then can find no way to release himself. Thus, he is always bewildered, and repeatedly he dies. Purport. As I already explained, the influence of the modes of nature is very strong. The living entity, entangled in different types of fruitive activity, is like a silkworm trapped in a cocoon. Getting free is very difficult unless he is helped by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Om Gyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim Yat kripatamaham vande Shri Gurum Dinataranam. Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Shrimati Radhanath Swami Nityanamani Namah Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharani Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyati Deshita. In the translation again, the foolish embodied living entity, inept at controlling his senses and mind, is forced to act according to the influence of the modes of material nature against his desires. He is like a silkworm that uses its own saliva to create a cocoon and then becomes trapped in it with no possibility of getting out. The living entity traps himself in a network of his own fruitive activities and then can find no way to release himself. Thus he is always bewildered and repeatedly he dies. So we're analyzing more how the material nature works and how this entanglement of the living entity in this material nature works. Yesterday, Dr. Krishna Prabhu was saying how the living entity originally is pure and belongs to the spiritual world, but comes down here and becomes a fallen soul. So with that comes a certain package that we have to deal with, and it's like getting when you're in a prison, you get a certain uniform, or in some prisons, I don't know whether they still do it. Probably not, but there used to be a time when you get a certain uniform, and there is a certain restrictions, or in a COVID, there's a certain restrictions that you can move, can do this, and etc. So in the same way, or in a similar way, in our life, um, we become conditioned, even if you don't look anything in the transcendence, but in our life we become conditioned by certain activities, desires, and decisions that we make in life. For example, you're going to uh, college and you get a certain training, whatever it could be, become a tradesperson, uh, getting skills in that or another field. Then because of that decision, you then often end up in that specific trade because that's the decision you made. Uh, or if you move to the certain neighborhood, you're going to have a certain type of neighbors. Of course, you can make assessment: is this neighborhood good, and etc. And you may have made all the fantastic assessment, but it may be that neighbor you didn't realize is very loud. Yeah, if you're a devotee, you're getting up early in the morning. This is the time that the neighbor is partying. So somehow or another, you made that decision, or like you made a decision to like get married or find a partner and etc. And everything may seem to be fantastic and etc. And later on, there can be some challenges, there can be some problems, and you kind of become, to some extent, stuck in that situation. So by various types of decisions that we make in life, we're kind of creating our destiny, and it kind of becomes uh, we become kind of caught up in those situations and in those decisions. Or another thing, so this is like more external thing. Another thing is like a behaviors. We can get stuck in a certain behaviors, reacting in a certain ways. Something happens, and we become kind of conditioned to react in a certain way. Like for example, with anger, or other people may react with when they receive treatment of anger. Most of people would become resentful. So that becomes kind of wired behavior, and it's like almost there is so much books now about, and from psychology point of view, you can become conditioned by a certain behavior that you are doing, reacting in certain situations, with the stress. You put two people in the same situation, one will be in anxiety, stress, or get depressed. Another person is just like no problem, carries on. So there are different ways how people become wired, and it is described in psychology that the neurons and etc. They kind of react in a certain way. In the beginning, you act in a certain way, and it's a new thing, and then after you did the same thing for a while, those neurons becomes wired. I mean, on a physical level, but we're also going to speak more on a spiritual and transcendental level. But on this physical level, those neurons get wired together, and we just start reacting exactly in the same way, uh, again and again and again. Or like various types of addictions that are there in the world. People also become kind of wired because of certain experience they get. They're dealing with a certain problems in life, and they start taking shelter of something to deal with those challenges and problems in a certain way, and to take shelter, to process certain feelings or challenges or etc. And take shelter of something that can become addictive, and it not necessarily can be drugs or alcohol, but for example food. You can become addicted to deal with your stress, anxiety, or etc. with taking a lot of food, taking shelter of hamburger or chocolate, or it's quite common, and that kind of becomes addictive. So you can see that to understand this principle of the modes of nature that conditions us conditions us in a certain way of behaviors and action is not very difficult, because when we see in our own life, all the time we are conditioning ourselves and creating that cocoon with our own saliva, as this analogy says. uh, in a sense, don't want to sound gross or anything, but in a sense that we creating those types of reactions and behaviors and conditioned responses by the way how we react to the situations. And there is a categorization then the soul when it comes into this material world. There are three types of different behaviors that the soul conditions oneself. And of course, we have this freedom of choice. You may sound like we are completely helpless here, we become caught in a cocoon, but actually, as described, we create that cocoon. There's nobody else to blame that, somebody else created that cocoon for us. Actually, we, by our choices, and we may do something repeatedly again and again and again, then we're building that cocoon around us. And there are three types of different cocoons, according to Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna is explaining, and in Vedic literature explaining these three different types of cocoons. So one way to react with the situations is this in a mode of ignorance, or called the tamaguna. That's various types of harshness and anger and illusion. Uh, etc., laziness, sleep, and etc. If we take shelter of these things, and we all sometimes take to the smaller or bigger degree, especially in this age of Kali, it's quite common to deal with the situations and the challenges in that specific way, and a lot of people are dealing in that specific way. So sometimes we just kind of grow up. Of course, there's the two things I was actually thinking today. Because in modern psychology, they often, I mean, there's like different theories. One theory is that your nature is coming from your birth, is kind of wired into your genes. Is a one theory. Another theory says that all your nature is because of your upbringing. The children that you played in your playground, the parents, or like nowadays is this big question, like a gender roles. Where is it coming from? So is it all like Scottish people, they wearing kilt, and it's considered completely normal for them, but in some other part of the world, somebody would wear kilt, it would look like, what is going on here? Something is wrong here. So is it because of the conditioned behavior that the gender roles are there, for example? So there's a big analysis, and there seems to be that the modern psychology is starting to going towards the idea that is all because of the upbringing and the social behavior and conditioning and etc. That all these things comes up, but actually transcendental idea is that is both. By your previous life, by your desires, by your actions, you created a certain cocoon. So you're born in a certain body. It can be female body, it can be male body, and they'll have a certain nature that comes together with that. But at the same time, it's also there will be a certain influence of the outside from the environment too. There will be a certain influence from environment, our upbringing and etc. But often that environment becomes like almost arrangement of nature to facilitate our karma too. So we are born in a certain situation, but that with a certain nature, but also environment also facilitates our karma. So that's also kind of, you could say, a certain result in the cocoon of your past life, your body, your situation, your nationality, your country. This is all the cocoon that we created by our past life. However, at the same time, that freedom of will still remains in us to make certain choices. So although that cocoon is there, still there is a certain ability to act and make a different choice. But when we are in a mode of ignorance, that ability to choose is very, very significantly compromised. That cocoon is so thick and so strong that to get out of this, for example, anger, conditioning by anger or envy, or like a very extreme laziness and etc., and taking shelter, running away from the problems by sleeping too much. So these are kind of uh, mode of ignorance, cocoon, that we become very, very conditioned. So it's very difficult actually to get out of that cocoon, and also the desire to act becomes very minimal as well. What happens, like yeah, a lot of people nowadays, there's so much attractions and the things to work, and so this mode of passion and lots of desire creates a lot of desire, so you work really, really hard, but then you can burn yourself out, and then shift yourself into this depression, anger, envy, etc. You just go down, and as you can see, there's a big problem around the world. Of course, there is a lot of uh, reasons why people get depressed and etc. There is also like a physical reasons, but from the material modes of nature point of view, path and choose that path, uh, and we it's very, we can get stuck in there. It's a big challenge, for many people around the world. Um, you can get stuck in those behaviors. Another cocoon, we become very, very conditioned by so many desires. I want so many things, and the world, is providing so many possibilities and opportunities, and I have so much limited time. So let me work very, very hard to get me more and more and more. I want this and that type of gratification. I want this and that type of experience. I want this and that type of relationship. Let me do as much as possible. And you just kind of go that roller coaster of various types of experiences and relationships and desires and this and that car and this and new phone, and just kind of trying to get more and more. So that's another type of conditioning or cocoon that it may seem to be like a freedom. It looks like a freedom, but you're conditioned by wanting more and more and more, and in a different, more and more different ways. Shishikodanitay Mayapusha Shiki Jai. So in the modern day, it's considered a freedom to be in that kind of situation. I have enough money to do anything what I like, or let me earn more money to that I do whatever I like. But it's also become conditioned by greed, become conditioned by and attached by the gratification, that when we don't get it, we're very, very distressed. So I described that a person in a mode of passion is very moved by joy and sorrow. When there is something that is fulfilling the desires and the gratification, is just everything is wonderful. It's riding this wave of joy. Everything is fantastic. But as soon and you become very attached to that situation, and then you cannot remain permanently in that space, because of again your cocoon that you created, karmic reasons. So when you get lost of that wonderful experience, it's so distressing, and so it's very, very moved by sorrow, and so there's this tendency just to shift between mode of passion and mode of ignorance, getting very depressed, and then somehow or another getting out of it. And a lot of psychological help nowadays, when you get really depressed, you go to the doctor, and what the doctor will try to help you to motivate you again to act for the very thing that originally has caused you to become frustrated. You tried, so many things to enjoy in the mode of passion, you become frustrated. So this the whole therapy will take you to motivate you again to do it, but in a different way this time. So this is the situation of the modern psychology, and I mean, I'm not like a dismissing that we shouldn't use it. There is a many, when you broke your leg, you have to go to the doctor. So you may need, even if you're a devotee and etc., there may be various circumstances that we need to go and get that professional help. But at the same time, we need to understand this kind of bigger picture, what is going on there. And then another cocoon, and it's still considered a cocoon, although it's considered less kind of difficult to get out of that cocoon, is the sattva guna. It's a mode of goodness. Mode of goodness when it's very beautiful and quite detached and quite determined and knowledgeable and responsible and etc. So you may think, how this is the cocoon. It looks like, very liberating. But what happens in that situation is that one becomes also conditioned by the sense of happiness and knowledge. So you're feeling this very wise, and there's like everything seems to be very happy and etc. But there is also a tendency to start thinking, I'm better than everybody else. I got this knowledge. So we can shift again to the pride and mode of passion, and also the sense of happiness that comes with it. It can also compromise one's, for example, intensity for spiritual practices, because when you were happy there is no like a no, but nothing is poking you to make an efforts to go forward, um, because it is feeling happy and great. So often, people who are going through this happy period and they like responsible and etc. There may be a bit of lack of there, although there is some growth, but there may be a lack of growth spiritually because you are not, when you're a bit distressed and the things are problematic and etc., you're a lot more motivated to try to resolve it and try to find some solution and push forward. So you may experience kind of lack of desire for transcendence when you are in a mode of goodness. And there's always competition as well for the supremacy among those different modes. So yeah, we get stuck in this different types of cocoons, and it's very difficult to get out, as we know, especially if you're in one of those thicker thicker ones, influenced one of passion, that is depression, anger, or etc. It's so difficult. That conditioned behavior is so deep rooted. Mode of passion, maybe it's a little bit easier because you're at least motivated to do something. You really, really want. So it's a bit easier because when you don't want anything, you just don't want to get out even. You don't want to change from who you are. You just accept that this is the way I am, and that's it. I can't change anything. I've been always like this. So you become conditioned by being conditioned by the thinking itself. If you don't even believe that we can change or get out, and if you don't believe that you can get out, it will be almost impossible to make that change. But what happens as well with that these types of cocoons is in a mode of ignorance, there is, although you don't want to act and you don't believe and etc., but what happens, there's a certain degree of misery that comes with that. And that misery, it can motivate you to, you can get fed up with being miserable. You can get fed up with being angry. You can get fed up with, some addiction that you may have, or, you may start, you may kind of, it may affect your relationships. It may affect, the people that you care for, as because we read, that you can act against your desire. You may have a desire inside that I don't want to be lazy anymore. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be addicted. But you become like so conditioned. You just keep doing it, the same thing, and again and again and again. And just before example, when before becoming a devotee, I was kind of addicted to intoxication, and I kind of started to develop desire. I got fed up with it. I really, really got fed up with my bad habits, and this desire started to awaken in my heart. I don't want to live anymore. This is not authentic life. This is not what I want to be in life. But I was so stuck in this cocoon. As soon as I meet my old friends, we just get drunk or whatever we would do. Uh, so you get stuck in that situation. Like it's also almost like acting against your will. You want to live a different way of life. You recognize this is not me, and you may feel kind of guilty. This mixed feelings inside of you. You want to feel guilty and angry with yourself and upset with yourself, and you see how the relationships may be struggling around you, and so many things are going on, but you're just not able to change because you're so wired in that behavior. And of course, it's a bit easier when you are young, to make those changes. But it seems that as we become older, we become like a more and more wired in those kind of behaviors. So it may feel like a hopeless situation. What to do? It's everything seems to be acting against your will, and then you may come, because of all that baggage that you're experiencing and feeling, you may become like a fortunate enough and start, looking into spiritual life and the different solutions and etc. and methods. Maybe in the beginning, like a more psychological, material methods, but that may bring you to spiritual life eventually. And then also you may kind of hope that this will help you. And you are right. This is definitely something that can help us to disentangle us from those conditioned behaviors, um, and we give us some knowledge. And so, in the beginning, we may get this better understanding of what is actually going on. You know, obviously, there is a psychological explanation. You know, the wired, you know, behaviors. And etc. That is when you do something, it becomes. But in the Krishna consciousness, in the Vedic literature, we read as well that is when you do something, you're planting the seed, and each time you're doing the same activity, the seed starts sprouting and becomes like such a huge, massive tree. And sometimes you see these trees with so much plantation and it's spread in all directions. Sometimes it's compared to banyan tree. It's just unbelievable amount of stuff and that you just you know, it's like impossible. Try to uproot a big tree. It's like so deep rooted. You know, the hurricanes come, it just can't move it around. So you start understanding what is going on, uh, but still you may feel completely helpless. And as we read here, that the only way to get out, as Prabhupada says in the purport, is to get help by the Supreme Personality of Godhead and or representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, spiritual teacher. Uh, that's someone who can help you out. And this understanding is now like, even if you like don't accept anything spiritual, but the most effective methods, for example, to deal with addiction in the world are like a 12 steps programs and various types of manifestations. So that program that actually first, almost the very first thing that you have to do there is to accept that I am helpless. I have no power to deal with this. This is completely, I am in the cocoon. This is a really, you know, I caught up in this situation and I have no strength and power to get out of it. And then there is this, you know, various steps which you know, I won't get into. But the most important thing is to understand that you cannot get out yourself. You need help and strength from the superior source. And as we understand, that superior source is Krishna. But you know, people may call it in a different ways in the different traditions or whatever. They, you know, there's a bit of a kind of freedom for people to try to understand what is that superior source is. But we have a very clear description in the Vedic literature, this you know, Krishna, and there is obviously various types of expansions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it requires somebody who is outside of cocoon to help us to get out. And of course, all the analogies they got their limitations, and therefore a silkworm analogy, it ends at the point because the silkworm gets out itself. But in our spiritual analogy of the modes of nature, you are actually are not able to get out yourself. And of course, speaking about different modes of nature, you know, people do change their behaviors to a smaller and bigger degree. Uh, but they're still stuck. You know, you cannot really get out of the system of cocoons. You may be going to from the thicker to the thinner cocoon, and you may be able to do that, you know, with you know, yourself. But I mean, when you're depressed and etc., often it requires somebody else to help you to pull you out, because you know, the situation, it becomes so conditioned. And so often, you know, a person who is in a mode of passion or goodness may come to you and kind of help you, you know, get up, you know, and let's go do something, and you know, slowly kind of get motivated you, and you get. So even in those situations, often you need a lot of help and support to be able to manage it. But you know, in Krishna consciousness, we understand we need the help of spiritual master, we need mentors, we need some guides, and we need people who are, you know, you know, at least free from a certain behaviors that we are conditioned to help us to get out. So therefore, we need this support system to help us. and there is a initiating spiritual master, and there is instructing spiritual master, mentor, and etc. So these people can really help us to overcome our conditioned behaviors, learn us to revive ourselves and act in a different ways, and provide some examples and provide some guidance. And so many things in my own life that I thought, this is just impossible. I will never able to do this. But you speak with a person, who practiced for longer than yourself, and you find out that actually they also went through this. And this Krishna consciousness uh, is for everyone. There is not a single person that is not able to become Krishna conscious, because it's our original nature. But we just become so wired to act outside of our nature that it may seem impossible to act in our original spiritual nature. But it is possible, but it requires to learn the art. And one of the most important things is really to become free from that cocoon that we put ourselves in, to receive that superior help coming, from the spiritual teacher. They just being a transparent via medium for Krishna, for Krishna's teachings, for Krishna's mercy, for Krishna's power. And if you want to be helped, if you're drowning and etc., you really need to cry for help, and you will receive it for no doubt. And we have a certain experiences in our life that actually this is really works, but we kind of tend to uh, kind of forget it, or become a little bit too relaxed and etc., and we're not accessing that divine power that is there for us to connect with. But of course, the goal is not just to get out of the cocoon and then everything is fantastic. But actually, the goal is to get out of cocoon and develop this pure love, and live the life of true freedom in Goloka Vrindavan, in Krishna consciousness eternally. Um, so this is what we are trying to get there. And because of we experience some degree of higher taste and etc., that can motivate us to actually get out of the cocoon, because we see the light at the end of the tunnel. That there is actually, like like a festival. It's like yesterday, for example. It's a very very powerful kind of experience that you can set yourself. Actually, really want to get there, and it's really worthwhile to get out of the cocoon, because sometimes you think, oh, it's very comfortable, it's warm in the cocoon, even if I'm a bit upside down, standing on my head, but it's kind of comfortable because you're familiar with your situation, even it may be causing you a lot of misery, distress, and etc. But that misery becomes very familiar to react in a certain ways, and etc. We feel comfortable in that situation, but we can, when we get this experience, actually there's a lot to life, a lot more to life than this, and it's really worthwhile to get out of that cocoon. There is a world of freedom awaiting you. You can fly around as a butterfly instead of being this worm in the cocoon. So are there any questions or comments? um, Eamon was 1 millisecond earlier before everybody else.
Hare Krishna, thank you. That was a great
Hare
lesson.
Krishna.
It seems to me that there's stages of detachment, sort of material and things behavioural. I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
these things, I guess it's a process, but I can see that it's achievable. There's something about the mind, changing the mind, which seems altogether like completely more difficult.
Mm.
I think we all have that kind of, that whirring dialogue all day long that goes on. The messages, I think, sometimes we can tell ourselves, and often they're not all the time they're negative, but often it's a very restrictive kind of thing. I think it's quite easy sometimes to everything you say resonates so deeply. I really understand what you're saying, and it kind of means so much. But there's that kind of thing almost can't describe it. That how does someone? Yes, I can give up material desires. Sure, I get that. I can modify my behavior. I can work on that. I can work how I am behaving with others and try and be a positive influence. But that in itself, if I'm nursing all these kind of negative, punitive, punishing kind of thoughts, it's it's like a mountain that just seems so huge sometimes, you know.
It's a good point. Yeah, we have various tapes playing in our head, and sometimes it's this exactly the same tape. You press, one button, one trigger, and that record starts playing, and you press another trigger, then another record starts playing in the various situations. So it may feel like impossible task. Actually, as we raise through the modes, it is recommended. Although the mode of goodness behavior is still considered conditioned, but is a lot. You get a lot more freedom to and strength and self-control to be able to act in a certain ways. There is detachment comes. So therefore, familiarizing oneself with the mode of goodness behavior and bringing the routine in one's life, eating at the same time, going to bed at the same time, rising a similar time. These are all the kind of mode of goodness behaviors. Is starting giving you more power, because we lose the power by acting, in a certain ways, mode of ignorance and passion. We are more and more conditioned, and we have less and less power to be able to act in a different way. But as if you cultivate mode of goodness behavior, you're starting to regain that power to act, and then we're able to start telling a different story to ourselves with the same trigger, because you're starting to learn which story you need to tell, and you start to understand, actually I have a freedom to tell a different story, because we just become used to the record that is played at this situation. But as you're gaining more mode of goodness and understanding that you have a choice, you actually are able to start recording a different story and different record. But in order to get there, you need you may need somebody else to help you to change that story. So that's why we have a shastra, study of scripture every day, and Srimad Bhagavatam. You'll be able to change your story slowly, or association of devotees and mentor, spiritual master, shiksha guru, diksha guru will able to help you to change your story. So often it's very important actually to bring up that story out, because we're playing this record again and again in our mind. But you can come to someone and say, look, this is the story I'm going through, this is what my mind is saying, this is I'm going through, and somebody can help you and help you to change that record and say, well, actually this is not so bad. Or if you look in different perspective. And the potency of a sadhu and saintly person is that the worst scenario, you may feel that this is actually the best thing that happened in my life. This is the potency of a saintly person. And you think all the stuff that I went through, all these traumatic experiences and etc., actually now brought me to this point, and I get a better understanding of it. You may think, I'm so fortunate, actually. This is not so bad, and this is actually really good what happened to me.
Thank you.
I think was prana or Dakshida.
Thanks, Raghunath. I identify with everything you said, except I think I escaped a cocoon. So I'm wanting to know what the book says, or what the scriptures say about falling into another cocoon, or once you've escaped the cocoon, a lot of really bad things happen, because you're escaping the cocoon. It's supposed to be happy, joyous, and free, I would imagine, but it just wasn't like that for me. I'm talking about my own personal experience, So a lot of really heavy things happened, and I entered another cocoon, and as I see it now, I'm still in. You know,
Yes.
so that's just my personal experience. But I was just wondering, talk about getting free from. I'm sometimes I daydream. I wasn't too sure whether you'd said about falling back into.
Yes.
So I just thought I'd ask that question.
No, that's a really good question. Because you may think we went from one situation, maybe that was more distressing, but we are in another situation that is better, but it still feels like a cocoon. We are not free, or maybe we're building another one. But as I mentioned, those modes of nature, they are mode of ignorance and passion and goodness, and we can be almost going up and down. But in order to stay and establish oneself, transcendence is necessary. So often, we take shelter of the kind of material means of solving the problem. Just I mentioned, for example, psychologists. When you get depressed, you go to the psychologist, and will try to motivate you back into the mode of passion. Yeah, just do this, do it in a different way, different with another person, and etc. So it just motivates you back into the thing that originally got you into depression because you got frustrated, and you went back in there. So you can see that material solution. So some people just end up, going to psychologists for the rest of their life, because they tried another thing, they feel better for a while, and then they're down again, then they go again there. So this is the material solution. But in order to stay, out of the cocoon or be in that mode of goodness, therefore this is where the spiritual guidance comes in. That in the same way how we wired ourselves to act in the ways that are distracting to us, this very same principle also works for wiring yourself into the thing that is liberating you. So as I mentioned, understanding what the mode of goodness is, having this routine life, having a supportive environment, having this extended community, or visiting the community that is spiritual and getting some nourishment and inspiration and the knowledge, and you starting creating this supporting environment, and in the due course of time it gets also wired. So just like a negative behavior gets wired, you get wired into the behavior that is actually good for you. And also you add Krishna consciousness, you add the chanting and etc. You are not alone. Then there is a supportive system from devotees, there is a supporting system in your spiritual practices and sadhana and the chanting, and Krishna starts pulling you as well. But it may take some time, of course, but it's definitely possible. There's many examples that it is definitely possible, and we have a full this room is full of examples. So thank you. That's very good.
Thanks, Raman. Thanks, Raman.
Sorry, it's a bit late for the class. You may have already mentioned, but it brings to mind what Prabhupada was saying about Hrida Granti. So the Hrida Granti means Hrida is the heart, and Granti is a knot. That the living entity tries to fulfill one desire, and then they create a knot around their heart, and then in the attempt to satisfy themselves, or they become more entangled in another knot and another knot, and they become so entangled that they can't actually, just like when you get a ball of string, there's so many knots, you don't know where to start. You don't know if you're making it better or worse. And it's interesting here that the living entity is forced to act against his desire, but it's his desires that created this situation in the first place. So it seems like the more you try to satisfy your desires, then the less freedom you have in the future to satisfy them. So that's true. What do people do? Because you can't just sit there with desires and do nothing. So what to do? If you have some desire, if you don't fulfill them, then it can create some frustration, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, desire is a problem, and the thing is that you desire one thing and then desire another. When you get what you want, by the time you get it, you may want something else, and that is like a miserable existence of living entities since time immemorial, wanting one thing, eventually fulfilling that desire, and then wanting something else, or by the time you get it, realize it's not exactly what I wanted. So it becomes really, really problematic. But what the scriptures explains about our original desire. What is actually, like we sing every morning, that by the mercy of spiritual master all the desires get fulfilled. So what does it actually mean when we speak about fulfillment of all desires in Krishna consciousness? But it doesn't mean that anything that I ever wanted, now I had this 1,000 things list and it's gonna be all fulfilled now. I was like struggling in material existence, but I came to Krishna consciousness. Now all my desires will be fulfilled. But actually, there is one desire. When it gets fulfilled, you don't want anything else anymore. That's what it means to fulfillment of all desires. There is one original desire. When that is satisfied, you don't need absolutely anything else. And that is our original love for Krishna. When the essential, most fundamental need of living entities to love. But when that propensity is directed towards Krishna, and it finds that fulfillment and reciprocation in that situation, and it leads the perfection of that desire, you are no longer want anything else, because it just hits the target. It fulfills everything, all your aspirations that you ever wanted, and that's the meaning of fulfillment, all desires. You no longer will want anything. So that's one answer. Yes, well, I'm not sure. I'm getting quite late.
Thank you. Yeah, what you were saying about desires being fulfilled, then what another one's fulfilled. There's a vlog by Sri Ramraj, and the psychologists have worked out that if you buy something after 6 weeks,
Yes.
then you're fed up with it, whatever it is, a house or a car. And so you've got about 6 weeks, and then that's it. You'll have to move on to something else, a new phone,
Yes.
whatever it is. And the example of the cocoon, I thought it was interesting that there's a story of a little caterpillar that was trying to get out, and the boy helped it. He broke the cocoon open, and then when the caterpillar did get out, it didn't actually. It wasn't very strong. It didn't
Right.
survive. So the spiritual master's outside, and so you're wrapped in 3 cocoons, isn't it? Ignorance, passion, and then you get out into goodness, and then finally you get out. So the spiritual master's outside saying you need to work really hard to do this, and he's encouraging you,
Yes.
but you have to make the endeavor yourself. Otherwise, when you do get free, you won't be strong enough. So you have to go through that struggle to build up your spiritual butterfly wings,
Muscles.
so that when you break out, you can. So the just question I had was, can you go from the mode of ignorance directly to the mode of goodness, or do you have to break through the mode of passion cocoon on the way?
Well, first thing with the mode of ignorance is that you don't want to act. So general recommendation is that you need to work very, very hard. So which does require, a good degree of passion to be able to. So like, even like a chanting japa, for many years I was very, very tired. So if I tried to sit down in the mode of goodness, then I was falling asleep. So therefore I walked up and down, for a good few years, and to be able to stay awake and hear or try to hear to some extent Maha Mantra, until you reach the point that you're able, that kind of influence reduces and you're able to sit down and chant. So it's definitely cultivating that desire to act and work hard and etc. is extremely helpful. And so there will be this stage of going through the mode of passion, but we should not remain there. Keep moving towards mode of goodness, because sometimes we think, okay, in the mode of passion, this is a lot better. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said, this is great. If I can raise one of my disciples to mode of passion, that is wonderful. But we should keep moving. Prabhupada wanted us to keep moving forward, so we should move to the mode of mode of goodness, and you will feel a lot closer to Krishna. in that situation. So I'll stop here. Srila Prabhupada ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Nitai Gaura Premanande, Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.